the Quran. And I'm leading into the intro of the show, so this has a point. I'm going to introduce the subject here in a second, which is already on the screen. The Quran is the handbook of the KKK. So yesterday's live stream was about the twisted theology of the KKK, and we went through their handbook together. That led me into some other places. And long story short, I stumbled across something that surprised me, which was some people online not being very bothered by things I think they should be bothered by. And the thing under question that I found very concerning was a Christian pastor and apologist book. It's more like a booklet or pamphlet, sometimes called a monograph, written by Douglas Wilson. That's the pastor under discussion here as far as the author of the book. Also written by a man named Steve Wilkins. And anyways, this work is called Southern Slavery as It Was. Well, some various things related to what I was doing over the past couple of days led me to read this whole thing and make highlights in it. And I realized what I was dealing with was essentially I don't know any other way other than look at it as an apologetic of sorts or a defense of sorts for aspects of Southern slavery. If you don't think it's that, you might want to at least say that it's an alternative history in relationship to Southern slavery. So I found all that troubling because I felt like it soft-pedaled the brutality of Southern slavery. And I also feel like that it creates problems, especially for Christians engaging in urban apologetics, especially, to be honest, Christians of the Reform stripe. Now, in the past, I've recommended some of Douglas Wilson's work and debates. I still respect his intellect and stuff. But I wanted to review this book on the show tonight and go through it with you guys to see what you thought. And I'm kind of a fool taking this on. This is not anything personal or anything like that, but I'm kind of a fool critiquing, a book that's guaranteed to make almost everybody upset. And so, it just is what it is. Excuse me, let me turn on the fan in here. This long sleeve shirt. Oh. It's kind of getting me all hot. So, a lot of you guys are gonna have your opinions and stuff, but let's try to be reasonable and objective. And I'm not necessarily calling this a book review. I'm more calling it a book critique. So some of it's just going to be reading the contents to you and discussing them. All right? So now let me say real quick why this is important. It is true we want to believe the truth and not a lie. I agree with that point. It is true that we want to look history square in the face. It is true that we want to grapple with ethical issues in society and also that the Bible presents. And it is true that all those issues come into bear on a regular basis in regards to apologetics and our interaction with the culture. With all that being said, a book where a prominent, Reformed pastor apologist is making this kind of defense for aspects of Southern slavery, I think is something we don't want to see other people embrace. But the reason I did this is because I saw people not being too concerned about this, and I thought that they should be. This really just taints things, I think. And hey, I understand people got their convictions, so I'm not questioning people's motivations or anything like that. But it is what it is. So let's get into this. Hey, shout out to the live chat. You guys are great. Got a lot of great people. Warrior Woman from Australia, D New. What's up, Rocky? What's up, Andrew? All the way from India, right? What's up, Judah Lion, our Hebrew Israelite friend? What's up, Mr. Phil Fox, who's a great supporter of this ministry? Mr. Rambo7, our Muslim friend in the live chat. What's up? We also got Did I say? Yeah, I did say that. What's up, Nate? Nate is one of the coolest guys, man. He's just like such an encourager, man. Nate has like the gift that Barnabas had, where he's a son of encouragement. And I mean that. Old Hickory 12, what's up to you? What's up, that guy? What's up, Gerard Perry from BKLYN? What's up? Also, we got, who else do we got in the live chat that I missed? Did I say D-New? D-New, if I did. Now I've said it twice. If I didn't, now I've said it once. Mr. Example Night. And yeah, we're going to get into the show. Just let me give a shout out to Andrea Cruz and Sean Gregory. Let me give a shout out to my Coffee Cup Street Apologist Live, which Roxby just got today. Or yesterday, or whenever she got it. You know what I mean? I know it's a little bit late. Part of the reason why I did this late, everybody, is because, what's up, Miss Titus 2, what's up, Sam Pendleton, is because I'm going to have a special guest at the end of the show who's going to probably interrupt the broadcast. All right? Nominor, don't jump to conclusions, please. And I hope that you pay attention, okay? Thank you, Nate. And by the way, we're doing real well on that. What's up, Kimberly York? All right. Switching over now. Again, this is an objective critique of something. I pray by God's grace. Here's the monograph. It's on the screen. Southern Slavery as It Was. And no, it has not been repudiated. I know it was in 1996. Now it's been expanded upon in a book called Black and Tan. But here, I'll let you look at the TOC here for real quick. It's been expanded upon by Wilson in a book called Black and Tan. I think it appears I need to read that next. Some may say I'm not doing my due diligence by going with this one first. I understand that, but this one, I think, judged on its own merit, still has problems, and I have not heard it being repudiated. Expanded upon is different than repudiated. And there's a dialogue that the Thabiti Onwabwile had with Mr. Wilson at the Gospel Coalition, and no, I don't agree with everything Thabiti says, even though I greatly respect him, and neither the Gospel Coalition, it's not that, but there you can see that Black and Tan is still in effect, and therefore it seems like, honestly, a lot of Southern slavery as it was is still in effect. And I understand this is a broader issue, and so let's look at this, all right? All right. I'm not going to read every page of this book, but as you can see, I have highlighted key sections, okay? So I'll let you read. If you read real fast, you can look at some of the others. I'm going to go right into the introduction to the bottom half of the second paragraph, because this gives you a good idea what's going on here. Okay, you guys ready? Remember, this is a critique of the book. I want everyone to understand that. This is not something I am endorsing, and that's, by God's grace, done out of Christian love with Christian love. We have all heard of the heartlessness, the brutalities, immoralities, and cruelties that were supposedly inherent in the system of slavery. I already have a problem with this first sentence. Supposedly inherent, the system of slavery. Now, he does condemn aspects of the transatlantic slave trade, although I think he waters it down in the book. But why say supposedly inherent in the system of slavery? Because the book is about Southern slavery. That's what it's called. There are heartless brutalities and immoralities and cruelties inherent in the system of slavery, all the way to the sale and exchange of persons as if they are products or goods. Hey, what's up? Thank you, Mr. Phil Fox. I appreciate your comment. Let me know if you want me to read it, and I appreciate that. Not everybody appreciates the kind of stuff I'm trying to do, Mr. Phil Fox, but I'm glad for those who do to get it, and I'm glad that I hope it blesses people, man. It makes us all more equipped to do what we need to do as far as what the Lord has us do. So look at this. That's a problem right away. Supposedly inherent? No, it's not supposedly. It's inherent in the system of slavery. From the way families got broken up, the way people groups were broken up. And, I don't know in 2019 his affiliation with the League of the South, but I know the co-author of this book was a member of the League of the South. He was set on the board. Now, I know he's since left, because this book's not just written by Wilson. It's written by Steve Wilkins as well. And now he's since left, but they said it was not because of change of anything other than priorities. And my point is, the League of the South is big on kinship of white Southern peoples. And so if you want to extend that to other peoples, that almost kinist tendency, then imagine how messed up it is to break up the Bantus from I think the other peoples, or break up Bantu peoples and then mix them in with other peoples. You know what I'm saying? Meaning, the kinship of even the Africans within the ethno-linguistic groups that they had. Right away we have problems. I'm spending too much time on one word supposedly, but I don't understand this. This is problematic. Supposedly inherent in the system of slavery. They are inherent in the system of slavery, and we're going to get into that more. We have heard how slave families were broken up, of the forcible rape of slave women. By the way, that's all true. We have account after account from slaves and even sometimes from so-called masters about this kind of stuff going on. You may say it didn't happen everywhere. I guess that's true, right? But this is part of it. What goes on, of the brutal beatings that were a commonplace. Yeah. I mean, those overseers didn't carry a whip around for nothing about the horrible living conditions. We've seen the little tiny houses on the plantations and of the unrelenting work schedule and backbreaking routine. I don't see, he's going to try to basically discount almost all this, all of which go together to form our impression of the crushing oppression. It was crushing oppression. And that's why those slaves sang songs to Jesus that they could be liberated from that crushing oppression, which was slavery in the South. The truthfulness of the description has seldom been challenged. And look, please understand how I say this. The truthfulness of that description has been questioned. Now, Mr. Wilson, I don't think would like the company of the other people who have generally questioned it. So I'm not associating, I don't like guilt by association. I'm not doing that here. But I'm just challenging this statement as it is. You know who else challenges the truthfulness of this description? The Ku Klux Klan. The KKK has a revisionist history of their own, and they also have a common thing where they challenge how bad slavery really was. So this has been challenged, but I don't think you want to roll with those guys, and I understand that. The point of the small booklet is to establish that this suppression is largely false. We're just on shaky ground already. It is important to note, however, that the impression is not entirely false. Truth is, Southern slavery is open to criticism. Listen to this. Because it did not follow the biblical pattern at every point. If you're going to say, hey, I'm a theonomist, and I want to look at slavery different than a non-theonomist, okay, let's just go with that for a second. You still got to ask yourself, show me the places where Southern slavery did adhere to any version of a biblical pattern. It's almost none. If you say, look at the Old Testament slave laws and then take a look at those and you want to compare them, it's not that it didn't adhere entirely. It hardly adhered to any version of any understanding of biblical slavery ever. Is that at every point? It's just, this is soft pedaling a massive injustice. Some of those state laws regulating slavery could not be defended. Some? How about almost all, or maybe even many, or 100% is probably best. Regulating slavery could not be defended biblically. The laws forbidding the teaching of reading and writing, for example. How about the Fugitive Slave Act? That's one. I think that violates 1 Corinthians 7. One cannot defend the abuse some slaves had to endure. See, some slaves. Most slaves apparently probably had it pretty easy. Apparently, we're going to find out according to this booklet. None can excuse the immorality some masters and overseas indulge in with some slave women. Just saw these qualifiers. And Doug Wilson, and again, God bless him as far as some of the things he's done. But then when I look back at this, I'm just like, he's in something called No Quarter November right now. And in that, he's like saying, I'm not going to make any qualifiers for anything. And that's kind of a way he tends to write on his blog. And I get that. He's clever that way. But bro, this dude is filled with qualifiers. And when it comes to slavery, just filled with all kinds of qualifiers, Just qualifier after qualifier after qualifier. We got to really nuance this one out, you know what I'm saying? And excuse me, that's just how I see it. One cannot... The separation of flames that sometimes occurred. I mean, how often was the whole family kept intact, especially when you trace it back to the west coast of Africa? was deplorable. These were sad realities in the Southern system. Our purpose here is not to defend any such practices, thank God, where and when they occurred. Qualifier after qualifier. We have no interest in defending the racism in both the North and the South. Notice that? The books about Southern slavery got to have that Northern shot in there. Not that the North was perfect. I mean, look at Boston, which is often seen as the basic justification for the system. And how do we, in fact, condemn it most? In fact, we condemn it most heartily. It's hard to tell, but I'll take him at his word. But the question still needs to be asked, how widespread were these instances of unbiblical and ungodly treatment on the part of the Southern slaveholders? We have condemned such abuses, but were they commonplace or exceptional? Why does that question need to be asked? And the thing is, this book is not filled with exegesis. If you're going to say slavery is biblical, this book's not really filled with exegesis of relevant text to say, here's a way I think you should do slavery. Now, I'm not a theonomist, so I don't really agree with that position in the first place. But if you're a theonomist, what you going to do? Okay. Continue on here in the introduction. I am not reading this all. I already said that, but I'm reading certain sections. Here's a part where Bible verses are mentioned. And nothing is clearer. The New Testament opposes anything like the abolitionism of our country prior to the war between the states. Now, I'm okay with people saying war between the states. Okay, I think it's better than the war of northern aggression. I understand aspects of the southern mentality. I got squads, meaning I got family in both Alabama and Florida, okay? You know what I mean? I can get some of that. If you don't want to call it the Civil War, okay, that's not the end of the world for me. But, yo, the New Testament opposes anything like the abolitionism of our country. You know, you find out that he makes this case that he's opposed to revolution in regards to slavery. Wilson does. But here's what's interesting. Is the same Doug Wilson opposed to the American Revolution? Now, I understand we might call it the War for Independence, but I mean the revolution that happened in America against the Brits. It doesn't seem like he wanted something gradual there. Am I missing something? That seems inconsistent. The New Testament contains many instructions for Christian slave owners, requires a respectful, submissive demeanor for Christian slave. See, for example, Ephesians 6, Colossians 3, 1 Timothy 6. Now, I notice, and I'm not, trying to really go there in the sense of calling motives into question. I could see why he might leave it out, but I have mentioned this. So let me go ahead and let's see here. Mention it again. All right. 1 Corinthians 7. Listen to this. Verse 21. Were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who is called in the Lord is a slave, is a freeman of the Lord. Likewise, he who is free when called is a slave of Christ. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. So look, it's true. Paul's saying, look, if that's where you're at, okay. Now, I don't know how this Greco-Roman slavery really applies to antebellum slavery, because I understand antebellum slavery to be entirely worse than Greco-Roman slavery. Doug Wilson actually has the opposite understanding, and that's part of the point of his book. But notice how Brother Paul, the apostle, says in 1 Corinthians 7, if you can get that freedom, go ahead. Don't become as slaves to man. But you see, that's a passage about slavery, but that's not in that little list. But I think it should be. Okay, continuing on here. This section is a brief overview, okay? Statements like this, I just find entirely problematic. This is the kind of statement. First of all, how do you quantify this? This book is not really research, and I understand it's supposed to be kind of a pithy book in a sense. It's 22 pages. Where's this number come from? I mean, what is this? The Confederate Army was the largest body of evangelicals under arms in the history of the world, with the possible exception of Cromwell's army. I mean, if you want to really go there, what about all the wars right after Martin Luther's, activities with Catholics and of the Reformed or Lutheran states, during that time? You mentioned Cromwell, I guess because they're not as big. I mean, that's just such a strange statement to make. It's funny because he wants the Confederates to be evangelicals, but yet he doesn't want the abolitionists to be evangelicals. He refers to our understanding of history, Wilson does in this book, Wilson and Wilkins, as abolitionist propaganda. I find that problematic. R.L. Dabney, a godly man who fought for the South. R.L. Dabney certainly was a smart guy, but he was racist as heck. He gave Bull Connor a run for his money. And yet you got these Reformed theologians, and I am Reformed, who be quoting him like with no problem, no qualifiers. And, you know, Wilson and Wilkins didn't even need to say a godly man who fought for the South. Like, if they wanted to quote him, they could have just said R.L. Dabney without the comma, right? Made the point that the South lost the war. The sentence might even be better. But notice, we've got to describe our admiration for R.L. Dabney. R.L. Dabney was extremely problematic in his views. Even Desiring God, which is hardcore Calvinist, you know, I mean, they're Reformed as can be. That's my people. Listen to this, what he writes here. This is page 869. It was a systematic theology published in 1879. Here's Dabney. Thus, if the low grade of intelligence, virtue, and civilization of the Africa and America disqualified him for being his own guardian, and if his own true welfare and that of the community will be plainly marred by this freedom, then the law decided correctly that the African here has no natural right to his self-control as to his own labor and locomotion. Let me just break that sentence down. Dabney is saying, this is what Dabney's saying, okay? He's saying, since black people are lazy and dumb and can't think straight, nature has shown us that our laws binding them to us like little children are good laws. He doesn't have his own inherent rights like us because he can't even decide when he can go visit his girlfriend. You know what I'm saying? That's what locomotion is. That's what Dabney's, you know, phrase is there, right? Yeah, I mean, hey, bro, you know, I'm Reformed, man, but we gotta look in the mirror, you know, and be honest about some of these kind of things people have said. All right, so let's take a look here. This right here. Some Christians some Christians balk at having a sympathetic view of the South because they know that racism is evil. Yes, this following is a very important point to emphasize. Like abolitionism, all forms of race hatred or racial vainglory are forms of rebellion against God. Wait, what? Like abolitionism? Someone help me out here. Is he saying abolitionism is equally evil to race hatred or racial vainglory? And any kind of abolitionism is rebellion against God? Does he think that way in regards to abolitionism, in regards to abortion? Am I reading this sentence wrong? Yo, that's a messed up sentence. I didn't catch that. Such things are to be vigorously opposed because the word of God opposes them. Is he throwing abolitionism in their category? Oh my goodness. In brief, God has raised up all nations from one man. Okay, amen. Acts 17:26. We're all cousins, true. Maybe brothers, but that works fine. And not only are the races connected through God's creation of Adam, we are united, this time in harmony, and the redemption purchased by the Son of God. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and you have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nations, and have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth. Revelation 5:19. Boom, by far my favorite part of the book right here. Christy says she's confused. Let me break it down, Christy. I'll catch you up to speed. Here's what's going on, Christy. I'm Reformed. I love my Reformed people. But a guy who has a lot of respect in the Reformed community wrote a book back in '96 that I've just now fully went through myself. And because of some of the stuff I was studying recently for some other apologetic ventures we were doing, this also stumbled into my path. And so I went through the booklet that he wrote, Wilson, with his co-author Wilkins, called Southern Slavery as It Was. And I'm looking through it, and I'm criticizing it. Okay, that's what's going on. So hopefully that was a good summary of what's happening. We must remember, so this is a decent, little paragraph. We must remember that the leadership of the early church at Antioch contained at least one black man, Acts 13:1, and what happened to Miriam when she opposed the marriage of Moses to a black woman. As Christians, we regard the gift at Pentecost to be a great reversal of Babel. We believe that our missionary efforts will result in the elimination of racial hatreds in Christ. Okay. The Bible's view of slavery. So here he says, what do we mean by the phrase biblical slavery? or Hebrew slavery. And here you see his theonomy coming out. So I am not a theonomist, so I don't agree with this reading of the text and what it means for us in the new covenant. Now, he kind of simplifies a new covenant or progressive covenantal understanding, I think, as far as the way he disagrees with it, as far as this book goes. But, here he goes. And listen to this, what he says here. In the Roman Empire, the system of slavery was, along with the rest of that culture, in rebellion against the true and living God. In the Hebrew Republic, slavery was akin to indentured servanthood. The only permanent slaves were foreigners, or Hebrews who voluntarily submitted themselves to a more permanent servile status. But in the Greco-Roman world, the system of slavery was pagan from top to bottom, with the slaves having virtually no recognized rights at all. Well, I mean, if you're going to say that about Greco-Roman slavery, then what are you going to say about antebellum slavery? It's odd that he thinks antebellum slavery was better than Greco-Roman slavery, from what I understand him saying in a lot of this book. Look at this. The large number of these believers in the Old South did not... I forgot about this part. Listen to this. The large number of these believers in the Old South did have the effect of Christianizing it. He's saying they Christianized slavery. This means that the system of slaveholding in the South was far more humane than that of ancient Rome. Ancient Rome system wasn't based upon, skin and culture in the same way. For one, which I hear him make that point in an interview, so I don't get... Although the Christian church had not yet had the full influence that God intends his kingdom to have in the world, the discipleship of the nations is the process. There is his postmillennialism coming in. So I do think this is a place where postmillennialism and theonomy gets you in trouble. I really do. But there's other problems than that. Let's look at this. But if our churches had existed in antebellum South and a godly slave owner sought membership, we could not refuse him without seeking to be holier than Christ. Such a desire would be wicked, and this wickedness was at the heart of the abolitionist dogma. So here he levels his guns at abolitionists, because there's abolitionists who said, hey, if you got slaves, you can't get into some of these churches. Now, I wish more churches would have done that, to be honest with you, right? But look at this. He's saying that if you ran a church and you didn't let slave owners in, you were the wicked one, not the slave owner. This just seems like such a reversal of what should be the case, doesn't it? And how are you going to compare Philemon, which that's where he's getting this from, to a southern slaveholder? I just don't understand. The most plausible argument against slavery comes from the acknowledged wickedness of the slave trade. Like that's the only one. For example, Gary DeMar, that's a fellow theonomist, has recently argued that because the Bible prohibits man-stealing, gives the examples here, and that's true, by the way, Christians could not consistently participate at any point in a process that resulted from the man-stealing. Amen. Thank you, Gary DeMar. I've agreed. I've talked about this in relationship to the transatlantic slave trade. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, Cherie Wilson's not just a part of this work. He wrote the book with Steve Wilkins. And I was surprised, too, once I really dug into it. Now, some of you guys in the comment section are kind of trying to get me off topic, but I'm not going to bite your bait. All right, continue on over here. Let's look at this. Believers in the South engage in direct opposition to this evil. Hold on, what evil? Oh my goodness. I forgot about this part. Some of the parts are highlighted. He is claiming here that Christians in the South directly oppose the kidnapping aspect of the slave trade. Where is he getting this from? Like, he takes 3 words from Dabney as evidence. Just... They went to the markets. They knew where those men and women were coming from. How did they directly oppose it? Direct opposition would be, I'm not going to buy people who were stolen from their land. Wouldn't that be direct opposition? Before discussing whether slave owning in itself constitutes an indirect support of this capital offense, we should first ask if believers in the South engage in direct opposition to this evil. Now, you know what? Let me show you something here. Because check this out. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand. So I think you could extend this further, or if you buy him. That seems like a logical implication of this. You kidnap the man and you sell him, or he found in your hand. So you kidnap him, you keep him, you kidnap him, you sell him, or you know he's kidnapped and you buy him. I do think that's all wrapped up in this. And he's a theonomist, so it seems like he would see, hey, this is a legit capital offense, but yet it gets soft-pedaled, and there's a revisionist history, like the South was strongly opposed to this aspect. I mean, really? Those folks in Charleston lining up to buy men and women, boys and girls, they knew where they were coming from. Before discussing whether slave owning in itself constitutes an indirect support of this capital offense, we should first ask if believers in the South engage in direct opposition to this evil. Here the answer is clearly in the affirmative. For real, R.L. Dabney, in his defense of Virginia and the South, so he's quoting a pro-slaver work for his example, which is just strange, begins his chapter on the slave trade with these words, this iniquitous traffic. But yet Dabney in another place says nature's determined basically that our laws about these folks are right. Well, which is it? The hypocrisy that you've got to hold together for this is very difficult. It's like those magnets that you just can't, The duty of Southern Christians was clear. To not own people, they had to oppose the slave trade by buying slaves. I'm reading into it. I expect you guys to read along with this. You know what I mean? I'm like reading into what's on the screen because of the confusion I see. They did so fervently and zealously. What? Dabney's vehement attack on the slave trade was representative of many others. I just don't know. How is this happening? Oh, look, he does mention 1 Corinthians 7:20 here. I didn't catch that the first time through. Okay, well, then it seems like you'd be against the fugitive slave laws if he's quoting that way. There's a typo here, by the way. It says first caught. I made typos, so it's not a diss or anything. He's a solid writer. I'm just saying there is a typo there. Secondly, we must also remember that the consequences and ramifications of the African slave trade went far beyond the situation described in Exodus 21. Yeah, they were worse. In that situation, when the kidnapper was discovered, he'd be tried and executed, and the one kidnapped would be restored to his home. The issues were simple and clear. With the slave trade, the vast majority of the slaves had already been enslaved in Africa by other blacks. Oh, there we go. Black man did it first, so hey! They were then taken down to the coast and sold to the traders. Yeah, well, it's like this. In the beginning, they had a stockpile of people, basically, right? But after a while, these tribes saw the white man was willing to pay some money. They said, hey, we already don't like these people next to us. So they would go and purposely start wars and beef with people they knew were weaker than them just to snatch up humans. There's examples of this from historical records. I'm always willing to learn more about this, but my understanding is the Europeans' lust for greed drove, especially the latter part of the transatlantic slave trade, where they were actively starting wars to kidnap people up. This makes it just seem like, well, the black guys were already doing it. We're just taking them off their hand. I mean, just really? They were then taken down to the coast and sold to the traders. The traders transported them, usually under wicked conditions. I'm glad that's acknowledged, There's places where a market did exist for their labor. But where the civil leaders had repeatedly and consistently tried to stop the slave traders. I don't understand that. If they tried to stop them, then why are they allowing them to dock in their harbor and bring out human cargo, so-called, and open their mouth up and look at their teeth like their horse? What do you mean they try to stop? What? These auctions were publicly, advertised. It wasn't some underground trade. One of those places, Virginia, had attempted on no less than 28 occasions to arrest the slave trade, but was stopped by higher non-Southern authorities. Yeah, and we know that the South is all about listening to the North, so I guess their hands were just tied, right? If the slaves were not sold in the South, they were taken on to Haiti and Brazil, where the conditions and treatment of slaves were simply horrendous. So, if we don't buy these people, they're going to have to go down to Haiti, and it's worse down there. So let's do it, guys. I'm not sure. I don't know how to deal with this because my mouth was open. The restoration of these slaves to their former condition was a physical impossibility. Really? I mean, it happened with the Amistad folks. Now, under these conditions, was it a sin for a Christian to purchase such a slave, knowing that he would take him home and treat him the way the Bible requires? Bro. You really think these guys were out there while they're looking at naked women and men? I'm going to take them home and treat them the way the Bible treats them. I think I'll purchase them so I could go treat them the way the Bible would have me treat them. Come on, I'm going to treat you now the way the Bible would have me treat you. What? He already said there was abuses and stuff, and that the Southern slavery system was not biblical at every point by his own admission. So what does he mean now all of a sudden these benighted slave owners are going to take them home and treat them the way the Bible treats them? I mean, they would look at these women's breasts and say, "Look, she's got and these so she can have a lot of kids for you, and you can eat." I mean, they did this stuff with these people. It was like these auctions referred to these people as if they were horses or some kind of livestock. Basically, biological farm equipment is how they were portrayed as. If he did not do so, nothing would be done to improve the slave's condition, and much could happen that would make it worse. The slaves were not stolen cars. They were human beings. Exactly. Doesn't this seem to go against a lot of what he just said? And the many Christians who treated them lawfully were in no way disobedient. Hey, Dr. Funny. How you doing? Dr. Funny, this is from 1996. But here's the thing, Dr. Funny. It has not been repudiated. It's been expanded upon in another book, which I'm going to read. And the League of the South, which Wilkins was affiliated with, has also not been repudiated by either men. Just they said they have different priorities. Vocab, are we reading to gain knowledge or just to mock? Ham Sunshine, you know I love you, but I take exception to that comment. Let me tell you why. I am certainly at odds with some of these ideas and letting you know, and hopefully in an entertaining and engaging way. However, first of all, I'm reading to you. You know what I mean? Which, this is not a normal live stream. Not a lot of live streams read directly from the sources at length like I'm doing. And I think you know that. So I'm doing something above and beyond a lot of people what they do when they critique something. So I take exception to your comment. Not only that, Ham Sunshine, I say with all due respect, I am offering information and offering contrary examples. Let me give you an example of what I just did. I pointed out that it's not like the South felt like they had to listen to the North. With this comment here, where he tried to soft pedal as if they tried to resist, but the North, I gave an example of that, where it says they're going to take them home and biblically treat them well. I gave a counterexample where he had already admitted it was not always biblically done, even by his own admission. So I'm giving information here. I also went into 1 Corinthians 7 and what that meant for the thesis. I always looked at Exodus 21 and looked into that. So I hear you, but I don't agree at all. So I understand if you feel that way, but I don't agree with your comment. But anyways, all right, here we go. Dabney said it well. Virginia has the honor of being the first commonwealth on earth to declare against the African slave trade. So bizarre. And to make it a penal offense. In what way? Her action antedates by 30 years the much bepraised legislation of the British Parliament. By 10 years, the earliest movement in Massachusetts on the subject. It's weird. Folks who defend slavery also want to take credit for being progressive in regards to it versus other locales and principalities. In 1771, Virginia appealed to the king to stop the trade, saying that they had long regarded it as a practice of great inhumanity. In 1778, Virginia prohibited the introduction of slaves into their state. Georgia was the first state to write a prohibition of the slave trade into its constitution. You must remember that the Confederate Constitution outlawed the slave trade. The slave trade was an abomination. Amen. But see, you have this mixed aspect to a lot of this work where you have these condemnations that we could clap if they were just out of context almost, but then you have these contradictions where you soft pedal or water down as well. It's just very strange. The Bible condemns it, and all who believe the Bible are bound to do the same. Owning slaves is not an abomination. Would either of the authors who wrote this book like to be owned? Would they? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? Kimberly York, yes, I know that. I've actually done a number of shows on that. Sister, maybe you just haven't seen them. I know that I've actually done shows on this issue that you're speaking on right now. Your your third most recent comment. So yes, I know that very well. I've talked about the founding of the AME Church and a number of other things. So yes, this is something I know very well. But I appreciate it. I appreciate it. All right, so let's look at this. Now we're going to find out the true nature of slavery in the South according to the authors. If slavery had been as bad as the abolitionists maintained that it was, remember, I take great exception to this comment because it's like casting doubt on it. Yeah, you had William Lloyd Garrison, who was sort of, you could say, a member of the elite, but that's not all you had. Who else was an abolitionist? Who worked with Garrison? Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was an ex-slave himself. So if we're going to say, oh, if slavery has been as bad as the abolitionists maintained that it was, guess what? Some of those abolitionists, what are they? They are former slaves themselves. So they knew firsthand. Hey, what's up, Dr. Funny? How you doing? I understand it is late. I did that because I want to have my main man, David Wood, walk in on me because he's supposed to be arriving actually any minute now. So I went a little bit late to match up when he's rolling in. So David Wood is supposed to interrupt the show at some point, ladies and gentlemen. And as we have been reminded countless times, but thank you for the super chat, man. You and Michelle and Mr. Fox and just a number of other you guys are just really, you keep this going. Keep this going. Yeah, Michelle, I'm not placing blame on one group of people. I'm criticizing the nature of this book that claims it wasn't as bad as you might think. I'm limiting this. I'm limiting this book really a little bit. What I'm doing here is I am criticizing the thesis of this book. That's what's happening. And hopefully enlightening people along the way. Well, we'll see. And as we have been reminded countless times on supposedly good authority, such as Frederick Douglass, Doug Wilson, sir, is Frederick Douglass good authority about the conditions of slavery? Yeah, I think he was. And he's not the only one. I name him because he's so prominent. Then why were there not thousands of rabid abolitionists? Notice the slavery masters, the owners here. They're described as very genteel and sophisticated, erudite men who are going to treat everyone biblically. But the abolitionists are rabid. And I saw an interview where he said John Brown was a bloodthirsty thug. The characterization and colorization is just bizarre to me. Rabid abolitionists demanding an end to the evil. Well, you know why? Because a lot of people in America were racist, and the South had the economic aspect tied to slavery that the North didn't have, but the North had plenty of its own problems as well. Again, look at Boston, for example. I name that because it's historically known for some real messed up stuff in regards to race relations, but that's not the only place you look. And so being an abolitionist was not an exactly very popular thing. Charles Spurgeon got death threats, even from Christians, if he would come to the South because of his strong abolitionist stance. So this is serious stuff. So why were there not, well, we could say, why are there not thousands of rabid abolitionists in regard to abortion demanding into the evil? Because people like to sit around and they're okay as long as it doesn't bother them. Or even more to the point, why were there not hundreds of slave rebellions? There were slave rebellions. The South lived in constant fear of slave rebellions, and one reason is simply because the South was very effective at squashing and eliminating even the genesis of slave rebellions. And to be honest, almost every slave rebellion that ever tried to get off the ground, they got sold out by one of the other fellow slaves. These questions have not been asked often or loudly enough. That's like saying, why isn't there more constant, uprisings in Russia or China or North Korea? But, well, the conditions over there must be very good because you don't see widespread. No, it's because the system is very effective at oppressing people. Doug Wilson wrote a book, right? He wrote a book, right, called Logic. I don't see how this argument is logical. There's not a lot of slave rebellions in my estimation. Therefore, the conditions for slavery weren't really that bad. That is not a good logical argument. You can't make a strong syllogism out of that. Look at this. Abolitionist propaganda. I always looked at the abolitionists as heroes. Slavery as it existed in the South was patriarchal in its character. The slaves, servants as we called them, oh, isn't that nice, were regarded and treated as members of the families to which they severally belonged. All of them? Really? Do you rape your daughter? You know what I'm saying? With rare exceptions, they were treated with kindness and consideration. Do you take a bullwhip to your children if they disobey? The answer for most people even then would be no. So they're not treated that way. Do you make them sleep outside? Do you give them one pair of shoes a year? Like a lot of plantations only allow them to have one pair of shoes a year. They're not treated that way. They were treated with kindness and consideration. Frequently, the relationship between the slave and his owner were those of real affection and confidence. He's quoting a guy back here who let me tell you a little bit about who he is here. Let's see. Yep. Confederate veteran. He wrote a book, or a report rather, called Reunion of Confederate Veterans in Virginia, 1907. So who is George Christian that Doug Wilson is quoting here? He's a Confederate veteran writing in a report about Reunion of Confederate Veterans. It's a strange source to quote about how great slaves are treated, isn't it? Shouldn't we be a little bit suspect about his report? I think so. Now look, he's got a visitor here, Englishman Sir Charles Lyell, who says this, and Wilson quotes this like it's all good, but rarely does he quote the slaves themselves, and when he does so with great historical problems in his methodology, or great methodological problems in his historiography. They were, quote, better fed than a large part of the laboring class of Europe. Well, let's just say they were true. They weren't free, were they? Which one's better? Which one's better? Lyell's picture of slavery was mild, kindly, maybe inefficient and uneconomical. There's no whips, chains, or accounts of gross mistreatment in his picture. I just don't understand this. The Old South was a caste society, but not a compartmentalized society. There's specific roles for blacks and whites, and each knew their place. He puts that in quotes, so I don't think he's abiding by that per se, as it were. But what was often overlooked is the high level of interaction between the races, which was a common and everyday experience. Yeah, I read an account today. Everyone look at me for a second. I read an account today about a slave, and he was giving his experiences because they recorded these folks when they were older, like in the 1930s, I think it was. And he recounts when he was 5 years old, and now he was like 90 at this point. He says, I remember when my master introduced me to my new master, and it was the guy's son. And he goes on to say, even though I was 5 years old, I was given to my master's son as a birthday gift or whatever, and my new master was 2 years old. you got a situation here where you got a son giving his son, a father giving his son a gift of a 5-year-old slave, and the kid's 2. You know, these are real accounts, people. So this is one of the. Okay, everyone, I think you're going to be shocked by this paragraph. Are you guys ready for this? You guys ready for this? I'm going to read this loud and clear. Slavery as it existed in the South was not an adversarial relationship with pervasive racial animosity. Because of its dominantly patriarchal character, it was a relationship based upon mutual affection and confidence. There has never been a multiracial society which has existed with such mutual intimacy and harmony in the history of the world. I guess you could make an argument that says, hey, some of the portrayals of slavery weren't exactly right, but this is pure balderdash, hyperbolic balderdash, insane, delusional, historical revisionism. Read this paragraph to anyone who just... I'm just trying to take this in. And here's the kicker. The credit for this must go to the predominance of Christianity. Please, Mr. Wilson, do not sully the name of Christ with that. Don't saddle us with that. Please, I beg of you. The gospel enabled men who were distinct in nearly every way. See, that sounds racist to me. That doesn't sound like unity. Men who were distinct in nearly every way? Really? To live and work together. They were forced to be friends and often intimates. Yeah, when the slave master would come into the cabin at night, tell the husband to go work out in the field, spend an hour with the slave woman. What do you think he did? I read an account today where she says, when my master first tried that with me, we had a big scrap. And when he got close enough to me, I scratched his face all up and he never tried it again. That woman was lucky that she made it out without being killed. He left her and never messed with her again. But then she goes on to say, but most women who had that kind of situation and they tried to fight back, they were all beat bloody black and blue the next day and they had been raped. This is bizarre. Friends, do you know one of the reasons that they would give slaves to the little kids back then is they would say, here's your N-word friend. And then the kid had like this automatic playmate that they could boss around. I mean, that's like the kind of thing a kid would love, right? Hey, N-word, let's go run around the yard. And again, I'm paraphrasing from accounts of slavery I read today. This happened to such an extent that moderns indoctrinated on civil rights propaganda. Civil rights, it's in scare quotes, propaganda, will be thunderstruck to know the half of it. Doug Wilson almost talks like he was there and it was utopia. This is bizarre. Why have these narratives been ignored? Now, this is also bizarre. Okay, Roosevelt commissioned these interviews with former slaves and they recorded the results. It's so good that we have them. These slave narratives are multiple volumes, and a lot of things I'm repeating to you in paraphrase form come out of my exposure to those slave narratives. 2,300 former slaves. Amazing stuff in those. He's acting like they shocked everybody about how great slavery was and that scholars have ignored them. Mr. Wilson, what are you talking about? Every expert in the field uses the slave narratives as a baseline from which they start what they do next. You have to be familiar with them if you're going to be a scholar in this field. How can a smart person make such an ignorant statement in regards to the professional historians of the craft? I just do not understand this at all. The narratives consistently portray an amazingly benign picture of Southern plantation life. Affection for former masters and mistresses is expressed in terms of unmistakable devotion. Testimony to the good treatment, kindness, and gentleness of many so-called heartless slaveholders abounds. Many of the old slaves express a wistful desire to be back at the plantation. You know how we've heard the phrase heartless slaveholders is from ex-slaves themselves. Slave life was to them a life of plenty, of simple pleasures, of food, clothes, and good medical care. If the narrative's taken as a whole, there is no pervasive cry of rage and anguish. We see no general expression of bitterness and outrage. I read today one where a lady says, "Yeah, I love my former master. I love him like a dog loves a hickory stick." Now I'm paraphrasing it a little bit, but she was saying like a dog that gets whipped or beat with a stick. That's the way she loves her former master. Same way. Another guy said, every time I saw white folks after that, I just hated them. Now, by and large, you don't see that, and I think that's because of the work of God in these people's lives. It's not because slavery was so great. See, correlation, not causation type of thing. I think you could talk about that here, but let's just say this. Just because you don't see pervasive bitterness, it's totally fallacious. You're missing something. Many of these men and women had the work of God done on their hearts, and they operated in a power of forgiveness and love instead of revenge and bitterness, even towards those who mistreated them. Harriet Tubman got a giant rock thrown at her head by her slave master when she was a teenager. It damaged her, almost killed her. She prayed for the slave master's death when she woke up, and shortly after that, he got a sickness and died. Harriet Tubman said that she felt guilty for that for the rest of her life, as if she caused his death with her imprecatory prayer towards him. That is a lot of the heart a lot of these men and women had because a work of God had been done on their life. It's not because slavery was so great. Maybe put the credit where it deserves on the men and women who had forgiven people who had done wicked evil to them in the same spirit of Christ who said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Not the kindness of slave masters. This is just utterly indefensible. And honestly, it's hurtful in a lot of ways. We see no general expression of bitterness and outrage. Instead, we find on page after page expressions of affection for a condition which, in the words of one historian, shames the civilized world. Seriously? Antebellum slavery shames the civilized world? Wait, hold on. What's he saying? The conditions? Wait, what's he... Oh, I see what he's saying here. Okay, I messed up the reading here. He's saying it's contrary to that thesis that the slavery doesn't. I think that's what he's saying here. Let me move on here. Yeah, I think that's what he's saying. He's saying it's opposite to that thesis, I think. The overwhelmingly positive view of slavery, and all the more strikingly when one considers that the period being remembered by these former slaves could hardly be called the most harsh years of the institution, those years when it was under a fierce attack, when slave owners had circled the wagons. Predictably, the modern heirs of the abolitionists, I'm proud to be that, by the way, have fallen over themselves in an effort to discredit this amazing testimony. Seriously? They were old and their memories were defective. They were suffering under the Great Depression. Many would think of slavery in a warm way under the conditions they suffered. They were talking to white people and were about to say things that might get them in trouble. However, these efforts to explain away the overall testimony of the narratives fall to the ground. Check this out. First of all, after they got freed, white folks certainly made it really hard to live. And you know what? The Israelites said, let's go back to Egypt. At least we got some cucumbers there. Right? Remember that? Remember that? Remember that? So, like, the Israelites said the same kind of thing, not because being an Egyptian slave was so great. There are those scattered here and there who mention atrocities, and complain of the meanness and immorality of their owners. There are those whose voices drips with the bitterness brought on by years of unjust treatment and ungodly oppression. They were not too old to remember the outrage they felt then, nor had the outrage diminished over the years. They did not look back on their experiences with affection and nostalgia. They weren't afraid of what Whitey might think. In fact, they were happy for the opportunity to make their bitterness known. Their testimony adds the clear note of authenticity to the narratives. There was mistreatment, there were atrocities, there was a great deal of wickedness on the part of some, but as the narratives make plain, these abuses came from a distinctive, very small minority. The narratives have the ring of truth because they present the mixed picture which might be expected in an examination of any human institution. Slavery is not just any human institution, especially Southern slavery. So I don't like that moral equivalency at all. The surprise for moderns is that the mixture contains such an overwhelmingly positive view of the master-slave relations before the war. Check this out. This is the time to go to this, all right? Let me show you something here. All right, so I am reading from something that's a critique of this that I do not agree with entirely, but I want to show you something here. These WPA interviews, they spoke differently, a lot of the people, when they're interviewed by white interviewers or black interviewers. Let me show you an example right here. When speaking to a white interviewer, Susan Hamlin of Charleston, South Carolina, remembered her former master as a good Christian man who always treated Leah kindly. He sure was a good man, she emphasized. Yet, when she was speaking to a black interviewer, Susan described the horrors of fatal whippings that all the other slaves was made to watch. This is contrary to his thesis. This is the historical record. We shouldn't have to rely on secularists who did the work here. So I don't agree with everything in this critique, Southern slavery, as it wasn't. But this is important because what they do is show how the response was often different, and they give an example. So was he really a good man, or were there these fatal whippings that all the other slaves were made to watch? The same woman who told a white interviewer that her former owner just get his slaves so he could be good to them, nevertheless told a black interviewer, so she said, hey, he got slaves so he could be nice to him, kind of like Wilson was saying. told the black interviewer that her fellow slaves hated and detest both of them and all the family. Do you see this where the cursor is? You see this right here? Let me make my my window of my face just a tad bit smaller here, because I see that I'm blocking just a little bit of it here. Okay, here. You know what I need to do? I'm just going to have to make this a little bit smaller. Or maybe even smaller. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, now you guys should be able to see it, okay? Do you guys understand this, what's happening here? People was always dying, she explained, from a broken heart. The existence of such contradictory testimony is common knowledge to most introductory history majors. In fact, Susan Hamlin's interviews are frequently published in freshman historical methods textbook. Do you guys see this? Do you guys understand this? That is absolutely fascinating, isn't it? Isn't that absolutely fascinating? I think that is significant, and it shows that the work is really suffering from major methodological, notwithstanding theological problems. Let me show you again here another example. When speaking to a white interviewer, Susan Hamlin Charleston recalled that her master, Edward Fuller, didn't sell none of us. We stayed with our mas till we grown. When speaking to a black interviewer, she confirmed again that Fuller ain't never want to sell his slaves. Okay, hear that? So there's the same. One of his slaves, however, a mixed race woman named Chloe, who had a long, beautiful hair she could sit on, apparently wanted very much for Fuller to sell her away. In fact, Chloe begged to be sold. Fuller refused and angrily proceeded to whip her until there wasn't a white spot left on her body. Oh, how nice of him. 70 years later, Susan still remembered Chloe's ordeal as the worst I ever seen a human being got such a beating. Fuller never sold her. So, oh, look, never want to sell him, but look at this one. I wonder why she wanted to be sold. So here's another one in this series. Speaking to a white interview. Check this out. Sometimes children were sold away from the parents. The master would come and say, "Where's Jenny?" Tell them to put clothes on the baby. I want them. You sell the baby and the mom would scream and holler. You know how they cry, carry on. Generally, they sold it when the mom wasn't there. So you would go, you'd be a slave mom, you'd go work in the field, and you'd come back, and the master had sold your baby out from under your nose. But check it out. Now, speaking to a black interview, what'd she say? She recalled that when slaves got married, no minister never say in reading the matrimony, "Let no man put asunder," because a couple will be married tonight and tomorrow one will be taken away and be sold. Do you hear this? She's saying when the minister, because I saw where they made a point, oh, well, they had the same ministers perform their weddings. She's saying they wouldn't say what the Bible says, "Let no man put asunder," because that means to be split apart, right? Saying that they wouldn't say that because they know they could be split apart. Talks about that dang white pale-faced bastard sell my daughter who just married us last night. Imagine getting married and then gone. Back to the book. Here's Dabney. Now, while we freely admit there were in the South instances of criminal barbarity and corporal punishments, such as the lady who didn't have any white spots left on her body, they were very infrequent. Really? And were sternly reprobated by public opinion. Really? You could kill your slave and you didn't get murder charges on you? Is there an exception to this rule? Tell me about it. I'd love to hear about it. William S. White, a Presbyterian minister, said, "In all the lands there are husbands and fathers who maltreat their wives and children. So there are masters among us who maltreat their slaves." What a strange comparison, a natural to an unnatural relationship. But the prevailing spirit is one of great kindness, showing itself in innumerable ways. Their mutual dependence begets mutual attachment. I can fill volumes with incidents occurring under my own eyes, illustrating the statement, but I write for my own people, especially my own children, and not for the abolitionists. My own people? Sounds like League of the South stuff. Given this testimony, this is Wilson and Wilkins again, it is not surprising that most Southern blacks, both free and slave, is that really true, supported the Southern war effort. I don't even know if they had a choice, really. Some, of course, supported that effort from purely selfish motives. Oh, what kind of strange, what a weird sentence, right? Fully 20% of the free blacks owned slaves. I would like to see the source on that. Let's see here. Let's just go straight to it. 15 here. I bet it's a discredited book. Yep, it's the discredited book. So they cite in this book the initial edition of Ingerman's book. So Ingerman wrote a book in the 70s that when it got republished in the 1999 edition had like an addendum that said, hey, we got a lot of crap wrong here, and it's been pointed out to us by other historians. But when they cite the book, they don't cite the updated version of the book, Time on the Cross. They cite the outdated version of Ingerman's Time on the Cross. Do you understand what I'm saying? Did I explain that clearly? I hope so. So I figured that's where he was getting that stat from. So I would highly call that into question. In fact, I don't know if this is true, but there have been some people who have charged this book, Slavery as It Was, actually engages in plagiarism from that book. Don't know about that. I'm just telling you what I've heard. Most of these were quite wealthy and knew that a Northern victory would bring economic and social ruin on them, which of course it did. Yeah, but it might also bring freedom, which it did. But many Southern blacks supported the South because of long-established bonds of affection and trust that they had been forged over generations with their white masters and friends. They gladly supported the war effort with food, labor, and sometimes fighting. Their loyalty to the principles of the South rivaled and was sometimes even greater than that of some whites. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead. This show might go long. It's just is what it is. Let me get into this. Do you see what he's saying here? Now, I got to do some background here. Everyone look at me. I need you to pay attention here. This show's going to go long. It is what it is. Wilkins, who wrote this book with Doug Wilson. So Steve Wilkins is different than Doug Wilson. Understand that? Steve Wilkins was a board member of something called the League of the South that was actually established in the early to mid-90s. The League of the South has since changed a bit and became less subtle in their anti-Semitism and I would even say anti-black declarations and openly advocates for secession from the Union. I'm talking about right now, 2019. It's a group called the League of the South. Now, the League of the South's president, I believe, was the same one as back then, and Wilkins was the co-founder of the League of the South. Now, he's since left it, but Wilson said he didn't repudiate anything. Wilson was saying this about Wilkins. Didn't repudiate anything. It's just a change of priorities. Now, I say all that to say this. During the Charlottesville situation, one of the local news stations interviewed a member of the League of the South. Now, he's not the president, but it's a member of the League of the South. And remember, this co-author has ties to the League of the South. Now, he's since left. Listen, though, what this man said in regards to the question about support by blacks in the South in regards to the Confederate war effort. Are you following so far? Because he basically disagrees with the thesis. He's like, yeah, they were just a bunch of cooks and stable boys. That's what he says here, okay?
Look here.
So, it's the wrong one. Okay, hold on. I thought I had downloaded it. Actually, I'm going to play this while I look for the new clip, okay? This is the president of the League of the South. This is not the clip I meant to play, but since I accidentally got it on here, this is the president of the League of the South. Listen to what he says. This is a recent interview, by the way. Now, this is not Doug Wilson. My point is, this book undergirds this kind of thinking, I think. Listen to this.
There is this misconception about what nationalism is. Most people, when they hear the term nationalism, they think of a political entity. They think about the American nation. They think about politics. They think about borders. Well, yeah, there are borders, but the borders that distinguish what? Borders that distinguish not a political unit, a polity, but borders that distinguish a people, a blood people. The Bible talks about nations, and it means...
Hear that, trying to use the Bible? Yeah, the Bible talks about nations, but it doesn't mean it advocates for what he's talking about. Now he's going to give a list of accepted nations. And notice he leaves my people out, the Sicilians. He leaves the Italians totally out. But listen to this.
Means peoples, tribes, clans, groups of individuals that are connected by blood. So when we talk about the Southern nation, we're talking about not political entities. We're talking first and foremost about our people. And who are our people? Our people.
So this guy talked about the Bible, so I'm sure his people must be fellow Christians, right? Nope, not so much. Listen to the League of the South president.
Are white European Southerners. Now, we're mainly from the British Isles, but we're also from other parts of Northern and Western Europe, and even parts of Central Europe. But we are a distinctive
parts of Central Europe. My guess is he might mean Northern Italy by there, since they're of lighter stock. I don't know. This is bizarre. Hey, thank you, Sean Gregory. Appreciate you too.
Based on blood, and that from that blood comes culture, and from that culture comes our political institutions, and from the political institution come our borders and our nations, our nation states, as we call them. Germany, France, England, Scotland, Ireland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Dixie. They're all the same. We are a people. We are a nation. We are a blood with a land.
So that's Michael Hill. Now I'm going to play the video I initially wanted to show to you guys, where, remember what we're doing here. Follow along with this. I think you're going to find this very enlightening. All right? I'm going to turn this up a little bit. Now listen to what he says about black folks who supported the South. It goes directly against what Doug Wilson is going to say, okay? You see what I'm saying? Now, I'm not holding Doug Wilson accountable for this. I'm just saying this thing's a mess. That's my point by saying that. So notice how so far he's saying the same thing that Michael Hill, the president, just said. So far, he's on message, isn't he? I think he is. I don't think you accuse him of being an outlier. So the interviewer is making a point. There was a black man who was on your side, and you were yelling at him. So here is a black guy at this thing about this one particular monument. It's Fort Sanders, right? And this guy is not okay with the black guy supporting the cause. Listen to what he says, because the interview is pointing out his inconsistency here. This is the League of the South mentality. Oh, nobody can hear it? Okay, I'm going to turn it up. I'm not going to rewind it because I've explained to you what he said, but I am going to now turn it up. Excuse me, now I have the audio good.
Okay, this isn't an African nation. That we aren't in Africa, and the African people, they don't have a, they're not the owners of the South. There is one Southern nation, but the Southern nation is white and it's Anglo-Celtic. We are the descendants of frontiersmen and colonists.
Notice how it's not even good enough to be white in this guy's eyes. You got to be Anglo-Celtic, specific kind of white people, leaving out Sicilians.
Who conquered this land, who tilled the soil, who put blood into it.
Black Southerners do live here, and there were black soldiers in the Confederacy.
First of all, there were.
Hear that? So she's saying, well, even on your understanding or argument, black folks live in the South, and they were also supporting the Confederacy, didn't they? Which is what Wilson is stating. But listen to what this League of the South guy says.
Very few black soldiers in the Confederacy. They weren't allowed to fight with weapons until the end of the war.
Hear that? And that's very true, by the way.
Otherwise, they were stable boys and cooks. Second of all,
Oh, look at the dismissive nature of this guy.
African Americans. We all know that term. Everybody accepts that African Americans are a distinct group. I've got no problem with that. You know, they have their own culture. They have jazz, blues, rap. They have soul food, so on and so forth. You know, they have their own culture, their own people, and they're proud of that. But when it comes to me, I'm just an American, or I'm just a Southerner. I can't have an identity that's connected to my ancestors and my blood.
Black folks aren't asking for their own separate nation, bruh. What is this? I mean, let's call it the Nation of Islam.
Or at least that's what the state tells me, and that's the problem here.
Who is the state?
The state, as in the government, you know.
Okay, just
So watch this. Watch this.
in general.
The federal government, yeah, the
Okay.
federal government.
What is it about a black person, or an African American person claiming identity with Southern heritage that offends you?
It doesn't necessarily offend me, it's just misguided, because, I mean...
So this guy wants to be the guardian of who even gets to be proud of Southern identity. This guy's, it's misguided for this black man over here to affirm any kind of Southern identity.
You wouldn't take a Chinese man and put him in France and tell him he's French and...
Bro, under your logic, that doesn't work for you either. Because guess what? You're not native to the soil of the southern United States, are you? No, that's the Cherokee and the Muskegee, right? And the Creek. Not you. It's just so silly.
He claims French identity. It just doesn't work.
Well, I mean, if he's a
Citizenship, identity has nothing to do with citizenship and some ink on a piece of paper somewhere enshrined in a government hall. Identity has everything to do with blood and ancestry and land and history. The fact that my ancestors have been in this country for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years. They have fought in every major war, including against Germany in World War II, just to make the point. Yeah, every major war. So this is my country, and when you just bring anybody in and say, oh, well, they're a Southerner, oh, they're an American because they identify, or they partially identify with my nation and my culture, doesn't mean that it's right to replace us. And that's basically what is happening on a large scale. You don't have a lot of blacks or Latinos identifying with Southern culture.
Replace us. Well, you replace the Native Americans. I mean, if we're going to look at it the way this guy's looking at it. Okay?
You have numerous amounts of blacks and Latinos with their own national identities, which they should have, but they are invading the South, more or less, and they are...
Invading the South. See, so this is, this is the League of the South in the year 2017. Knoxville News Sentinel, right? And my point by playing this is, I played Michael Hill, the president of the League of the South, earlier. Now, this is right now. But in 1990s, the co-author of this book with Wilson was last name Wilkins, and he was a co-founder and sat on the board of the League of the South. Are you understanding why I'm bringing this out? It's relevant, this mentality. Now, Wilson doesn't say all this, but dang. Is this something we want to be associated with as Christians, as Reformed Christians even, as apologists? This deserves strong repudiation, not, well, there's just been a change of priorities. I'm not going to play the rest of it, but I'm going to go back to the PDF here and look at this right here. Most of these were quite wealthy and knew that in northern... the guys who were, so this is how the folks, the black folks in the South support the Confederacy, even greater than white folks sometimes. And he gives examples here of that, right? Which I just... I like this one that he includes. When asked why he refused when his master had not refused, the slave replied with disgust, "Master has no principles." These facts and countless others refuse to conform to modern abolitionist myth of a harshly oppressed people who constantly seethe with resentment. Yeah, they were harshly oppressed people. That's why they were willing to risk their life on the Underground Railroad with Harriet Tubman. That's why people were trying to escape all the time. That's why they sing songs of sadness and longing. It's not a modern abolitionist myth. It's from the sources of the slaves themselves. The fact that there were very few slaves uprising in the South further confirms the fact, no, it doesn't. The fact slaves were well treated, no, it doesn't. That's bizarre. And often had a deep loyalty to and affection for their masters. Now he gets into treatment for slaves. And even says they were commonly punished by means of a whipping. But look at this. This is so weird to me. Some whippings were severe. I mean, who wants to be whipped? In other instances, whipping was as mildly applied as the corporal punishment normally practiced within families today. Although some masters were brutal, even sadistic, most were not. The slave narrative is overwhelmingly favorable in the judgment of masters as good men. In fact, in the narratives, out of 331 references to masters, 86% refer to masters as good or kind. Quite a few would not allow whipping at all, and many only allowed in their presence. Now, where do you get this from? Now, I think that's from the outdated book. I think that's where he's getting that from. But remember some of the slaves, former slaves, would speak one way to white interviewers versus black interviewers. This is just bizarre. Then he makes great efforts to say the slaves ate just about as much as the average white family. And look at this. Nearly every slave in the South enjoyed a higher standard of living than the poor whites of the South and had a much easier existence. You know what? Let's just say that's true. What's the price of being free? What's the price of being free? What's the price of being free, ladies and gentlemen? That's a good question to ask, isn't it? Now, here he talks about being able to, slaves being able to travel and stuff. Remember, Dabney said they shouldn't even have their own locomotion. But look at this quote from Forrest McDonald. It was more common for slaves to double up on their work, to do 2 or even 3 tasks in a day, and then to take several days off. Really? Several days off? During which they might travel many miles by horse or by boat to visit friends, family, or lovers on other plantations. Now, again, I read some of these narratives, and one today I said, the guy said that he had a girl that he liked on another plantation, and he didn't ask for permission. He just went over there when no one was looking. But he came back. He wasn't trying to run away. He just wanted to visit her. And on the way back, they saw him. And he said he was scared. He froze. And he said they beat him something fierce, the white slave masters. But he had such a kind of, I don't know, his disposition was almost whimsical. He said, but you know what? That girl was something else. Now I'm paraphrasing, but I just read this today. I would do it again for that girl. She was something else. This is in the slave narratives, these recorded interviews with former slaves, you know what I'm saying? So it's like you just go get the lovers on other plantations. You know that if you're a slave, if you were a grown man and you were a slave, in most instances, you had to ask your master if you could marry somebody, like he's your pops or something. Do we think that's cool? The familial bond's my butt. Master, can I marry her? No. And I read another account. I'm going to tell you exactly what it says. Girl says she was 16 years old, and she says that the master came up to her and said, hey, you're going to live with so-and-so in that house right there. So get it ready for living. And a 16-year-old girl said, I don't want to live with that man. Meaning you're going to be married to him. And he said, now listen here. I'm not going to repeat all the language. Listen here. I bought you, and you're really portly, and he's really portly. And I intended for you guys to get together because you're both portly, and I want you to make me some big portly, slaves. I'll just say that. And he said, and if you don't, you're going to end up at the whipping post. And the lady said, the young girl, now she's recounting this years later, said, I thought about being bought off those auction blocks, and I thought about the whipping post, and I did what he said. He's basically saying, I want 2 big old... It's just crazy that all this exists, and you're going to call it abolitionist propaganda. Some of the families of slaves were broken up, but how widespread was this? I mean, you're literally causing divorce. They got these strange statistics from this outdated book to show it was really rare. Says that slave breeding was a myth, even though I just gave it. Listen, it's not a myth about slave breeding. Listen, I literally, in preparation for this show, I literally just listened, because I listened to some of them too. There's a really cool HBO special. I can't play it because I know we get copyright. Show where famous Hollywood actors get together, and what they do is they read from the slave narratives, like Samuel Jackson. It's really cool because they give it a sense of gravitas. And my point is, I was going through those, and when you look at them, the one I just read was about slave breeding, and it really happened. I just don't understand. Why are you calling it a myth? It's not a myth. Look at this. Clearly, had there been widespread sexual misconduct, the effects on slave morale would have been disastrous. Distraught and disgruntled slaves did not make good field hands. So, saying that they didn't do that because it would have been bad for slavery. Sexual exploitation. Look at this. Such arguments overlook the real and potentially large cost that confronted masters and overseers who sought sexual pleasures in the slave quarters. It would have been much easier and less risky for owners of large plantations to keep a mistress in town than to risk the possibility of the destruction of his own family by taking up with a slave woman. For the overseer, the cost of sexual episodes in the slave quarters, once discovered, was often his job, nor would he find it easy to... Now, I'm not going to read all that, but look, that is just bizarre and not true. First of all, it's not as easy to have a mistress because you don't own the mistress. You own this woman, so you can tell her, hey, you've got to do this with me. You know what I'm saying? So what do you mean? It's much easier if you could tell somebody, hey, you do this with me or I'm going to whip you. You know? That's easier. And not only that, again, in the slave sources that I was going through, the slave narratives, today, it's a multi-volume set. Guess what it said in those slave narratives? There is 2 little kids playing, and this kid was allowed to be closer to the house, and he was more light-skinned because him and I think one of the other slaves as well on the plantation, his father was obviously the white master. And so the little white kid was playing with the little slave boy, and the white kid says the N-word to him. And he says, don't call me the N-word. He says, why not? He says, we got the same daddy. And the kid looks at him and says, when he comes to visit us on a regular basis, he brings us food. And when we see him, we call him daddy, and he calls us his children. So at least this guy kind of took at least responsibility in some way. I don't know. And the girl, who is now a grown woman in the slave narrative giving the account, she said, and I looked up in the mistress of the house, that means the woman of the house, was listening over the window washing dishes the whole time to this conversation, just hearing it. So my point is, this is not a good argument. It's not historically factual accurate either. All right? Look at this. Look at this. Sexual exploitation. Further, to imply that black men would be indifferent to the sexual abuse of the women is to imply that they were somehow less manly than other men who would be indignant over such abuse. This common assumption about slave men is not only unrealistic and unsubstantiated, but an insult to their humanity and patently racist. This is so crazy. He's saying if you say that kind of sexual exploitation was going on, then you're racist against black men because you're saying that they would be indifferent to it. No one is saying they were indifferent to it. What we're saying is that people didn't want to get whipped to death. These arguments are so backwards. He's saying you're racist if you say sexual exploitation was a common thing. Now, guys, listen. Abortion is bad, and I've discussed that. But I do not like the tendency that some of us conservative Christians have. And I love you guys because I hate abortion, and I fought against it. But I do not like the tendency that some of us have when the discussion is about the unjust nature of slavery in the South. I don't like our tendency that some of us sometimes want to change the subject to abortion in 2019. The reason why this is relevant now is because it affects how we view the past. This is a relatively recent book when you look at the span of time. Now, I know within, the way things move now, 1996 wouldn't be considered recent. But when you look at the great span of time, it's in the, 20th, and we're in the very beginning of the 21st century. So we look at this and we say, okay, okay. How is this relevant? This is very relevant to a great many issues. And you can see the League of the South out there now. This is relevant because it affects how people view history. This is so relevant. I just like I don't like when we discuss pro-life issues and the leftist kind of Shane Claiborne Christians change the conversation to capital punishment. They don't like to talk about the evils of abortion. They want to change it to capital punishment as if there's a moral parity there. Parity, P-A-R-I-T-Y. I don't like how some of us, whenever the discussion is slavery, especially when someone's defending aspects of it from a biblical, historical basis, I don't like how we want to change the conversation to abortion at that moment. I just don't understand some of these tendencies. So I'm trying to be friendly to you guys, but I also want you to stay on target. Don't retreat to a comfortable area. You know what I mean? Don't do that. Don't do that. Look at this. He says that the slaves would be punished with adultery, or they'd be punished if they were adulterous or divorced with the whip. Like that's a good thing. You know? Now, I'm going to read an utterly reprehensible paragraph to you, okay? It's only 2 sentences, but listen to this. Wilson and Wilkins wrote this in their book. One could argue that the black family has never been stronger than it was under slavery. What? Who would argue that? Certainly not the slaves. One could not argue that. It was certainly stronger under the Southern slave system than it is today under our modern destructive welfare state. Slavery must be good then, right? Here's about the great medical care supposedly slaves received, as well as the great places they had to sleep. Now here's something about the problems. Tended with evils. It wasn't. Look at this. I don't even understand who could write this. As it, meaning slavery, as it existed in the South, it was not in any way perfect. How could it be perfect or utopian? How could slavery ever be utopian? I've never thought of anybody. Oh, the Hebrew Israelites. The Hebrew Israelites have a utopia in which they have slaves. So I guess their utopia is filled with slaves. But most people, when they think of any version of utopia, don't think slaves. Yes, Ham Sunshine, yes, this is extremely relevant. And here's why. When we do urban apologetics, these issues pop up on a regular basis. So it's extremely relevant. Not only that, your view of history affects what you think should be done in the future, and how you view the past affects things going forward because you repeat mistakes, but you can't repeat, or you will repeat mistakes and you won't repeat mistakes if you properly understand them. If you misunderstand history, then going forward, you have a wrong analysis. So going forward, you've got problems. It's extremely relevant because the book is recent. Again, I don't understand some of these impulse. You guys, I may lose people from this. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to you guys, but if I lose you, then I'm sorry. I wish you would instead have an open mind about what I'm saying, because I'm not doing this just from a crazy place. I'm getting into this. You know what I mean? I'm talking about slave narratives I've read. I'm bringing up counter data, and it's like people instead are saying, "Oh, or how's this relevant? Who's having trouble with slavery plantation owners?" You know what I'm having trouble with, though? I'm having trouble with people who defended slavery plantation owners. That's what I'm having trouble with. Just like I think it's relevant to attack the historicity or the historical accounts of Holocaust deniers. I've got a video for you guys I've got to play right now, because right now my doorbell is ringing. So I'm going to play this for you so you guys can see this, okay? And I'll be right back.
What is your view of Southern slavery? Okay. Boy, I've been wishing.
So this is an interview with Doug Wilson.
I'm glad this finally came up. The pro-life. In part to say to Paul Hill and people like him, you were taught in school that John Brown was a prophet, a seer, a visionary. But he was actually a bloodthirsty thug, and he was trying to solve a problem. The problem of slavery in exactly the way the New Testament says not to solve that kind of problem. So And this is what dawned on me one time. I've been pro-life from before Roe v. Wade, there was a court decision where New York State liberalized their abortion legislation, their abortion laws. I remember being very agitated by that. I've been pro-life from almost the point of becoming an adult. And I used to glibly just say, well, Supreme Court abortion, Supreme Court Dred Scott, it's all the same. Everything's the same. And then one day it dawned on me reading the New Testament that the Bible, the New Testament talks an awful lot about how to handle a social problem, slavery, when you have masters who are slave owners, Christians who are slave owners, and Christians who are slaves themselves, all in the same church. You've got Philemon and Onesimus. And when Paul tackles the problem of slavery in Philemon, his solution is not for Onesimus to chop off Philemon's head and march around his head on a pike. Right. His solution is to remember, Philemon, you remember you've got a master in heaven. Treat your slaves equitably, as he argues in Ephesians. And Timothy says, you slaves, if you have believing masters, work doubly hard for them. Don't. In other words, there's a real subversiveness there. Direct aim at the institution of slavery, but it is not the John Brown violent revolution approach.
So what's the difference then between say the abolitionist spirit that was in America in the 19th century and then say the way
I played enough of that. Hold on, I got to unmute myself so you guys get the general idea. Sorry about the echo. Oh, man, nobody. Oh, okay, guys, sorry about that. Apparently there was an echo. Excuse me on that. Man, okay, too bad on that. Sorry about that. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Man, too bad. Okay, well, okay, gotcha. All right, so here we go. Let's just finish up then with this. Let's finish up here right now with looking over here at this book. There's only 5 pages left, okay? Let's take a look at this here. When modern Christians condemn such things, however, they must recognize that they're not condemning something defended by the South. It's weird they're saying that evils of slavery weren't defended by the South when the South was willing to secede from the Union and go to war for it. I just don't know what he means. Look at this. I don't even understand how he could write this. I'm going to read this paragraph, but it hurts me to read this. I've highlighted the last part because that's what I really want you to see, okay? You guys ready for this? Okay. Look right here. Third, a problem with slavery not yet discovered is the fact that slavery promoted what could be called a slave mentality in the minds of some blacks. Not everyone, as we have seen, was so affected. There are amazing stories regarding the industry and ingenuity of many slaves. Not everyone imbibed the slave mentality, but many did. There are many complaints in the slave narratives which indicate this. The majority of those interviewed complained that they would rather be slaves again than to be free with all the responsibilities that freedom entails. It's not just because of the responsibilities that freedom entails. It's because of the way the Jim Crow laws and everything else popped off right when folks were trying to get free. Ironically, if slavery had not been so pleasant an experience for the majority. So this is transforming from slavery wasn't as bad as you thought to slavery in the South was a pleasant experience for most slaves. Are you guys reading this? This mentality would not likely have such a strong hold upon the minds of some of their descendants today. Whoa, shots fired. I'm just going to let that sit there. If you don't know what he's saying, then maybe you're lucky. Look at this. Welfare laws have removed the black man from his position of breadwinner. Was he the breadwinner under slavery? and head over the home. Was he the head of his own house under slavery? No, he wasn't. So this is bizarre. You're complaining about the welfare state, but what about under slavery? And the black family has gradually been destroyed. Like slavery didn't do that. Blacks were freed from the southern plantations only to become the slaves of an impersonal state. Well, which one's better, even if that's true? You know what I'm saying? Bammer, a former slave from Arkansas, put it more succinctly. Before the war, you belonged to somebody. After the war, you weren't nothing but a... Really? Look at this. Unexpected blessings. Did you expect to find this chapter heading in a book about Southern slavery? I didn't. But in spite of the evils contained in the system, we cannot overlook the benefits of slavery for both blacks and whites. I guess there's benefits for some greedy plantation, benefits for black folks? Here's some of the benefits. Martin Jackson of Texas put it this way. I believe that slavery in this country, taking everything into consideration, was a godsend for the slaves. The 20 million Negroes are descended from 4 million sent over from Africa. If it had not been for the slave traffic, we would still be living in Africa. I would be a heathen and my children would be heathen. Look, now what this man is expressing, what Wilson does bring up, Genesis 50:20, the attitude of Joseph. Okay? All right, well, I fixed the echo. Man, I'm so sorry. So sorry, man. Sorry about these sound problems. I'm sorry. But this is the attitude of Joseph, where you take the best of a bad situation. It doesn't mean it was good. Slavery produced... Okay, look at this. I don't have any more echo now, and I'm glad. Okay, I want you to read this paragraph to you. Remember, even when there's an echo on this on the sound, the words are still on the screen, so you guys can read them, okay? I want you to read them, okay? But now let me read this to you. Look at this. Slavery produced in the South a genuine affection between the races that we believe we can say has never existed in any nation before the war or since. Whatever its failures, slavery produced in the South a degree of mutual affection between the races which will never be achieved through any federally mandated efforts. I don't even know what to say. Do you? Do you? And then this is weird too. He's talking about a slave who talked about the master and all his other N words. And look what Wilson writes. And with the use of this word N, it is important for us to remember the mutable nature of human language. What today constitutes a gross insult did not have the same connotations a century ago. As if when the masters called their slaves the N-word, it was cool back then? I just don't understand this. None need lament the passing of slavery. So it's really weird. The book ends with this strange declaration. Now, he's talked about the benefits of slavery and how bad it wasn't and how easy everybody had it, supposedly, and then says none need lament the passing of slavery, even though he's saying that many slaves did lament the passing of slavery. This book is just so two-natured. You could take it apart and almost write two books. Now, the pro-slavery side would be much larger, but for real? Truth Freeze. Let me talk to you. I'm going to deal with some of these comments. First of all, I want to draw your eyes to that while I change over screens, what's highlighted. I'm going to talk to you because I knew I was going to get some attitudes like this, and I'm going to go ahead and deal with these. Truth Freeze says, slavery bad, yes, we get it. Okay, Truth Freeze, if slavery is bad, yes, we get it, then let me ask you something. Why are two educated men, Wilkins and Wilson, writing a whole booklet which has not been repudiated, telling us that slavery was not all that bad? So you're saying, hey, slavery's bad, we get it. Yes, slavery's bad, but no, we don't all get it. And that's why I need to bring out this information and apply some logic to this text to deconstruct what is said here. Remember, this show tonight is called A Critique of the Book. So if slavery is bad, yes, we get it. Then why was this book written? And why did I do this show? Remember, the reason why this show popped off is because I found people supporting elements of Wilson and what he was doing. And I said, what about this? Isn't this concerning? And people found this book not concerning at all, which I found concerning. So slavery is bad, but no, we don't all get it. So that's why this is certain. This is why this is important. Nobody is glamorizing babies killed every day. Nobody is doing that. So Truth Freeze, why would you even write that? Go to my channel and type in the word abortion and show me what you come up with, because you're going to come up with some stuff. Let's put Is Real Son 2 on timeout since he's bringing in total irrelevant nonsense. Israel's son, go play your imaginary games someplace else. And I say that with all due respect to the other Hebrews-lights in the audience. But let's keep on topic here. No one's glamorizing it. Why would you even say such a thing? And guess what? Slavers killed lots of babies. And organs harvested of women daily in Islam, slavery, and war. And so, yeah, but why are you changing the topic? Are you uncomfortable with discussing this particular evil? Remember, the whole reason this came about was because we were comparing elements of the KKK to Islam. That's how this show ended up even happening in the first place. And if you're upset about organs being harvested, it sounds like you're against the idea of people being looked at strictly as means to an end instead of ends in of themselves. So if that's the case, then it seems like you would have a great problem with antebellum slavery, which viewed humans basically as biological farm equipment. Seems like you would have a problem with that treatment of the human body, which is, yes, made in the image of God. So you shouldn't be uncomfortable about this and keep on wanting to change the topic to other things. I don't understand this. And you should also know, you display some of the tendencies of an abolitionist in regards to abortion, which is fine. However, know that Doug Wilson claims he's against the revolutionary abolitionist idea in his repudiation of how slavery was ended in the United States of America. So what you going to do about that? And here your true colors come out, Truth Freeze. That is evil, yes. Anyone repudiate it, they are Jesuits or Zionists. This is the level we are dealing with here, folks. So is Doug Wilson a Jesuit or a Zionist? Okay, I'm done with the conversation. That was fun. Ah, boy. Okay. Now, okay, let me deal with you too. S. San says, the reason some of us are sick of talking about this particular evil is we're pretending like white America haven't been beating themselves half to death with guilt for hundreds of years now. Hey, Asan, I don't know if you've been with us the whole show, but I've been reading a book whose whole thesis congratulates white Southerners for the way that they treated slaves during slavery and says it wasn't as bad after all. They don't feel, there's not a lot of guilt there. In fact, the League of the South has the opposite idea. So everybody's not beating themselves up about it at all. They're quoting Dabney like he's a good guy who said it's the natural of order things. So, no, everybody's not there. I knew this was going to happen.